What's up, everyone? I'm Jackie,
And I'm Lindsay,
and we are Women Leaders in Sports Medicine.
here to help you grow your game and own your game.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us on Women Leaders in Sports Medicine. Today, we have one of my very old colleagues back in the day when I was a physical therapy aide in Fresno, California, Dr. Jocelyn Vartanian. Jocelyn, thank you for joining us today.
Welcome.
What's this been like for you? We've been kind of chatting with everyone about kind of the craziness going on with COVID-19. How is like daily life? Has it changed a lot, or are you still kind of up and running?
Yeah, our company never stopped running. We were deemed essential here in Fresno from the get-go. So what our company did was be very proactive and kind of stayed ahead of the game a little bit on minimizing fear, really educating the population of why they should still be in because they have a condition that's essentially a reason to keep coming in. But with that said, obviously quite a few people dropped off because they're still scared or you're not sure. It's been very insightful because you can see people's true colors and how they react to certain situations. And I feel like you already get that when you get a player, an athlete who gets hurt and how well they handle it or how well they don't handle it. It's kind of the same thing. There's been a lot of people that maybe you would have thought would not have handled this very well, and they've been very resilient. They understand the process. They trust us. They trust me with their care. And then there's still some other people that believe everything on social media and the mass hysteria kind of principle, and you know, they don't cope as well. So it's been helpful to kind of get into more of the psyche and mindset of your own patients and clients to see how they motivate when we are here for, yes, some psychological kind of aspect of their healing, but really ultimately like their physicality and why they should be here or why they could take a break. So it's been helpful to kind of get into the mind of like your own patients that maybe you thought you knew because of some other reason.
Yeah, that's such an interesting statement. I think a lot of us, you know, working in outpatient PT right now, are kind of experiencing similar things. And I know for me, I'm working less hours because a lot of people just don't feel comfortable coming in, even though we are essential. And you're absolutely right. I think there's like opportunities here too to be like, oh, you know, like you'd be good to have a little bit more independence, and that's okay. And then just you know, seeing some differences in patients that I agree. I thought I was like, oh, you're definitely going to come in. And they're like, oh, okay, I guess we're not. I guess we're doing telehealth or home programs or whatever it may be. But yeah, I think we absolutely are essential in what we do. And I think eventually people will start to be like, oh, I should take care of my body a little bit more. I'm worried for when people come back and they haven't done anything and how they're going to be feeling then. So we'll see in the weeks to come.
Yeah, I think our healthcare system as PTs is going to boom in another 4 weeks because of people not being as active or thinking that they're being just as active, but then they're sitting and watching TV or whatever so long that it's extremes, and then something's probably going to happen.
Most definitely. Or a person who never did a boot camp before in their life and now 5 days a week is doing IG Live.
Right.
I feel like I go on Instagram and everyone's a personal trainer all of a sudden. So fortunately, I don't know. Hopefully we can continue to get the word out there that this is what we do. This is what we help with.
I wish I could put a disclaimer on everything, just saying, just don't do burpees, because like 99% of the population cannot do a burpee correctly to save their life anyways. And then now you're, like you said, throw in these like everyday boot camps, which usually always have some type of burpee element. And they're all going to come in for back pain or whatever. And I'm going to have to just shake my head and hold my tongue a little bit about why would you even do it? You can't even hold a plank. Why would you think you could hold a burpee? Like, yeah.
So relatable. I think it's like that for a lot of the boot camp movements for, a lot of our patients that transition to staying at home because they feel more comfortable, which is absolutely fine. But I've already gotten emails of people coming in and being like, so I started doing this thing. And I'm like, what makes you think that that's okay? That's a hilarious statement. That's so funny. Kind of getting into it a little bit more, we like to really ask people, what is your why? Why are you into physical therapy? What has kind of promoted you and going through your journey as far as has your why changed as you've progressed in life?
Yeah, I think my why has always been pretty much constant. I've always been a caretaker. I've always wanted to help things, animals, people feel better. But I honestly feel like people don't know their full potential. So they might have an expected idea of like what they should return to, athlete or non-athlete. And I kind of feel like why wouldn't we try to get even better? Like not just get back to where you were, but I want to see how people can open their mind and push their physicality to get even better, so that my usual kind of motto is, your hour of therapy should be the hardest part of your day. Like if I can get you to the point where you're training yourself to kind of be mentally stronger and physically stronger, then literally everything else you do in the day feels good. It's easy. It feels like you've been doing it kind of all your life, without any hardships or struggles. So I want people to reach their full potential and maybe break through that glass ceiling above them that they didn't necessarily know was maybe glass. They thought it was like an ultimate. Mm-hmm. And that's even on players, on athletes. Like I'm sure as many of you know who work with athletes, think they know literally everything about like what they should do or can do or what they've done in the past. And the ones that are a little bit more open-minded to taking some feedback, or they make this one step that they're like, like I've never been able to do that. It kind of helps me motivate even harder to go, oh my gosh, like what could they do? Mm-hmm. And so I kind of just want to take that approach with every client and just get them to a level that they feel, unstoppable.
Yeah, that's a great statement. I mean, you touched on some really great things there. And I think one of the overarching things is what we do is always trying to push and grow towards something better. And I think that's something that's really unique in not only sports medicine, but the rehab world and conditioning world or dietitian's world or whatever it may be is, you're not only trying to create a change in lifestyle and mentality and strength or whatever it may be in your patient, but that also happens for you. And we learn from our patients as much as we hope that they learn from us. So yeah, that comment on maximizing your full potential, I think we start to see in our patients every day. And those are the best moments, not only just, they're able to walk better, they're able to throw, or they're back on the field, but those moments they come to you after and they're like, like some of these days were the hardest days of my life, but I feel like I've come out of this not only better as an athlete or a mover, but as, someone with a little stronger mentality. So that's awesome.
Yeah, just to piggyback off what Jackie said, I mean, obviously I love everyone's why. I can really resonate with your why, and I think a lot of our listeners tend to, because it's something that's applicable across any sports med field, not just physical therapy. I know strength and conditioning coaches who are trying to build better people in the weight room, not just stronger people. I know athletic trainers who are trying to keep, better people in the field, not just help them along and get to their average, trying to push them to be better. So I love that that's your why. So transitioning a little bit from your why, can you tell us a little bit about your journey in the physical therapy field and how you ended up where you are today, which is a pretty exciting opportunity? I'll let you expand on that a little more.
I think like probably majority of PTs, I was an athlete myself. I played all my life since first grade, multiple sports, every season, got hurt in like my sophomore year of high school and was given physical therapy where I was put in a corner and given E-stim and ice. And that's all I remember a few times. And I don't remember going many times. I don't even remember who my therapist is, because if I did, I'd come back and give them a little bit of a speech about how I'm just as important as an adult who has a job. And I know I'm not like a pediatric, like a little kid who is, delayed in walking or something like that. But I just felt like I was this high school athlete that they're like, oh, whatever, take some ibuprofen, put some ice on it, and you'll be fine, like get over it kind of thing. And I didn't, even though I had multiple consults, I had a couple MRIs, I competing, like, why don't we open up your knee and see like what's wrong with it kind of stuff. And then I was finally given just stay off of it all summer going into my senior year. And I was like, well, what do I do with my life? Like, that's all I've ever done. Like, I don't do anything else. So I did, because, I complied because I wanted to get back my senior year. And at first day of basketball camp, I was miserable. I was worse than the entire year before. And then I go to see a new doc who's a team doc of one of our universities. And he was like, why weren't you in PT? And this whole time I was already considering being a PT or an AT, but I wasn't quite sure what the difference was. Where was the delineation between where one stops and the next one begins? Because for me, even as a female in high school, I was ready to become like the head AT PT for the San Francisco 49ers and Giants. And like, I was like dead set on it. I was like, for sure, this is going to happen. I know, females aren't around, but I'll be the one. So it took my own bad care to kind of go, okay, wait a second. And then this other physician going, you should have been rehabbing this whole time. Like, you should have been working on your strength and your flexibility and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, how can you guys be so like polar opposites between like my consults that I had? So long story short, I didn't really get into therapy. I didn't really get the care. I missed my senior year. I had to pick like one sport out of the two that I had picked the prior year, and only played half of it. I picked basketball and missed softball. Go into undergrad knowing for sure I'm going to be a PT. I'm going to be the better one that doesn't do this to somebody and doesn't let somebody feel forgotten or fallen behind. So I went to San Diego State, got my undergrad there, and then I got into the DPT program at USC. And so I graduated. I graduated in 2008. I worked for a faculty member for 2 years while I also worked at Children's Hospital LA per diem. And I was adjunct clinical professor at USC for one of the DPT3 classes all during that time, which was awesome because it gave me a whole different scope of patient populations and kind of settings to work with. And then I moved back home to Fresno, and I worked for a private practice for about 8 years, where I met Jackie. And then there was a weird kind of falling out and kind of an opportunity to kind of just start fresh. So within 8 days of not working for my prior company, I had my business license to operate my own. I was going with more of like a personal strength training kind of rehab for athletes. I worked out of a baseball academy here locally called DIB. So most of my patients were baseball, but I still had some of my pro soccer players that I was working with my prior year with the Fresno Foxes, which was a USL pro team. It was their inaugural year. So I was kind of blending both. And then within 2 months of that, by the time I'm literally getting like my paperwork back from my lawyers and making sure like all my HIPAA forms are perfect and whatever, I got approached by like 3 different entities at the same time in the same week. And it was this weird, like, what is happening kind of process. 2 months ago, I went from fully employed, worked for a pro team as well as my second job, to unemployed for 8 days, to sole proprietor for 2 months. And then now I have this other opportunity to work for a few different kind of companies. So this one that I chose is who I work with right now. They're called Pro PT. They were a South Valley, meaning in our region, they only had clinics in the southern kind of valley. And they were going to be opening up clinics in Fresno, and they were looking for directors to run their clinics. So at the time, my mindset was not, yay, I can't wait for 40-hour weeks again, because I had this completely creative space and any time frame I could work with. I was working out more. I was like getting jacked. I felt awesome. But I sat down with the CEO and COO and one of my colleagues who had approached me and said, your name came up as a potential director. And I freaked out because I knew you. And I was like, oh my God, I know her. Like, she's awesome. Like, you guys have. And it really took my colleague to be like, just entertain this idea. Cause I was like, I don't know. Like, oh, I got to be in a clinic again. Like, I don't know. So I sat down and it was almost like a, this is too good to be true kind of conversation. My first interview went 4 hours and it felt like half an hour. Like it was,
wow.
Drove home and was like, what is happening right now? Was weighing out pros and cons forever. But it was too good of an opportunity to pass up. And honestly, I felt like this was putting me in the role with a complete infrastructure to learn and grow as a director, to learn how do you do things on your own? How do you run an entire company on your own? But yet I have like a corporate backing. So there's always somebody I can reach out to. I always have mentors. I always have somebody in any realm as a PT that you would need help for. So I thought, you know what? I think this is something that, God laid in my place that I have to go jump at this. And so since January 2019, I was hired on, but we were waiting for my clinic to be built and constructed and tons of construction delays and all that normal jazz of just being patient and wait and wait and wait. I opened in 2019 in November. And so I have my own clinic now. So I'm running this. I have one other PT underneath me. I have a front office and we're doing awesome.
What a story.
Yeah, my goodness.
Talk about, there's so many different points we can touch on there. I think we do really need to start with how powerful your why of getting into the physical therapy field is, or even just the field where you're helping someone. Because again, I know you mentioned, and we talked about even before this call, how you've trained teams and individuals in the past. And I still think that can resonate with someone who's maybe on a path of, oh, am I going to go the ATC route? Am I going to go the PT route? Am I going to go the strength coach route?
Yeah.
But that of the power of unfortunately being there and being in a position where you were let down, and the fact now that you're in a position as a clinic director, not even just an experienced physical therapist, to influence others who maybe haven't had to deal with something like that, but the importance of the role they play in every single patient's life, essentially. Right. I think that's amazing. To come back a little bit to your current situation and timing, what did you feel like you did in the past, or were some qualities that you had that allowed those three entities to all of a sudden just reach out to you?
Yeah, I think I've always been a very honest and direct person. I've always been very confident. I remember in which you guys might remember from certain classes, I remember when we'd break out into little smaller groups and you had to describe your other person in your group, or what's one comment or one word to describe them. I've always been told I'm either intimidating or confident. And I'm like, okay, I never thought of it as necessarily a bad thing. It was more like, is that how I want to portray myself in each aspect that I'm in? So as a student PT versus a PT versus a lead PT for a pro team versus clinic director, how do you want to project yourself and come across that? And I think being able to have all those roles was, I feel like I was always honest with myself about what I can provide. And if this is my medical opinion on something, it's because it's a fact, it's a statement. It's not my, I think opinion. This is what's going on. But with that said, if I wasn't sure, I was still very open and honest. I was able to say, you know what, I'm not so sure about this. It sounds or looks or feels like this. So with that said, this is our approach, or this is what we should consider, or do you have options? So I feel like it was just me being confident in who I am and not trying to pretend like I'm good at everything and I know everything and I could do it all by myself. I think I'm better able to recognize when I need to stop and go, you have no idea what's going on. So you should probably ask somebody else even to hear it out, or just sit and kind of marinate on it and process this a little bit more. I don't react very quickly to player client kind of statements. I tend to stop and kind of hear until I get to know them a little bit more. And then I'll go into like totally a joking, sarcastic, like seriously, like that, or whatever it is, right? So I think it's just knowing who you are and really being confident in yourself and understanding, why you should speak up, why you shouldn't speak up, understanding what's your bottom line. Like if my bottom line is to make people get better, then regardless of my situation, employed, not employed, private practice, hospital, teaching, you're here to get other people better. You're here to train other students to get better. You want things to basically reflect you if you're touching that. And I don't like mediocrity. I don't like things to settle. And so I think it's just, you just have that internal drive to keep pushing to basically complete your why, regardless of your situation or your location.
I love that you always kind of come back to your why in some sense. I think sometimes along the way and along people's crazy journeys, sometimes they lose track of that and they have to kind of reevaluate and come back into it. But that seems to truly kind of permeate everything that you've done. And I know that line between people's perspectives of confidence versus intimidating is a fine line. But I think at the end of the day, if you know who you are and the product you're giving and what you're trying to give people, like it doesn't matter. Like someone appreciates the honesty and the confidence in some way. And I think sometimes, at least for me, some of my students and some people that I've talked to are sometimes afraid to do that, to be confident, to say, I know what this is. I know who I am, and I'm going to portray it that way because they're afraid of how it's going to be received. But I don't think that should matter. It shouldn't matter at all, right? Like I think that type of, I don't want to say attitude, but perspective of yourself and coming back to your why is what eventually comes back around full circle and gets you to those opportunities of people calling you up and saying, hey, like I'd love to work with you in this opportunity, because that also portrays to the right people, right? Someone along the way must have said to them, I know Jocelyn, and I know she would be amazing for you. So that's great that you kind of stay true to yourself and your why and kind of come back to it at the end of the day. You also spoke to, or you mentioned a little bit, kind of at those moments when you realized you didn't know something, kind of chatting with certain people and kind of getting their advice. Who were some of your kind of greatest mentors, and what were some of the best pieces of advice that they'd given you to help you along your journey?
Yeah, I mean, at school at USC, I was like, oh my God, I hope I grow up to be XYZ, faculty. There's quite a handful. And I was like, oh my gosh, right? But honestly, like my greatest mentors have just been my family. I grew up as the oldest of 3 originally, and then 5 when my dad remarried. And that happened when I was in 6th grade. So I had to grow up like a little bit early just because of being the oldest child, right? But my grandparents picked me up from school every day of my life until I could drive. And just watching how my grandpa just loved to just put his head down and do his job. And he wasn't a complicated man. He was very gentle. He was kind. He was very humble. He was very quiet. But you just could feel his presence, you know. Then my grandma, who was the matriarch of the entire family and was like she ran everything. She was very, I mean, this is my Mexican grandma. Like, if you did something out of line, it didn't matter. You don't get to negotiate. It's her way. And you're either doing something outside to pick, you know, make time go away so that you're probably out of her face and you learn your lesson, or I'm walking with like a Bible on my head to like correct my posture and learn, you know, discipline and you know, like, and then yet she was like the most loving person when you kind of got to know her, you know, so she might have came off a little bit hard. And I think that's why I think people also think I'm intimidating and stuff like that, is I'm business first. And then if you just ask questions, you know, you'll find that I'm like super non-judgmental. I've seen a million things in my life, but I'm just kind of like, I'm never going to judge how you got here, but I'm going to help you and I'm going to guide you in your reactions that you make now. And so regarding patient care or something like that, or even statements, I kind of feel like I got that from them. My dad's always been a nurse practitioner in the ED department at one of the hospitals. And he's always told me, but I never really got it until later, that you don't have to like everyone. You don't have to like everyone's comments and statements, but you need to respect everyone because you don't know where they came from and you never know when you're going to run into them again. And so I grew up going, okay, Dad, like, yeah, it sounds like basic common knowledge, right? Like respect others and be kind and whatever. And then you run into a million people. And as a PT, you find that you know everyone. You're like 1 degree away from knowing somebody, even like in our right? And so you want to know that you had a positive influence in people's lives. And maybe you weren't like overly friendly and friends with somebody, but stuff comes back around. And if later in life you find out that, hey, I remember you helped me out when I was like in a really bad place, or hey, look at my shoulder, look at it, it's doing great, you know, blah, blah, blah. Cool. And I can't remember names to save my life. So I'm always like, yeah, buddy, like, great, you know, but it's always been family that has driven how I guess I want to portray myself, but the values that they gave me, even though they weren't medical trained ideas and values, it was just, we're in a people business. So you need to treat people like people and not get myopic on the injury and the science behind the rehab that they need for that specific, you know, injury or surgery or body part or whatever impairment they have. It's, if you get on a people level, you're going to do better. You're going to have more success. And so wherever you end up getting that from, you know, that has to be something that helps drive your care and how you want to do your job, right? Mentors wise, other than that, honestly, I haven't found a lot of other physical therapy or sports medicine kind of mentors, in a sense, that other than my local, like I've always bounced off my local people, right? But other than that, yeah, I don't have anybody that I'm just like a disciple of, and I run back and forth from like East Coast to West Coast, you know, for anything in particular. But I do follow a lot of kind of leading professionals in sports medicine that I appreciate their approach, or I'll go, how would I treat this? And then they'll say it on some podcast and I'm like, yes, like, like, you know, so like, right. So even though I haven't talked to them, I'm like, dude, I totally get you. That's what I do. Oh my God, I'm not in left field. Like, perfect. Right. So online remotely, I have some mentors. They don't know. They don't know.
Yeah.
But I'm like,
we all have many.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great point you touched on too with mentorship. Majority of the time, I'm sure when people hear that word, they think, oh, this is someone who I'm doing everything the way they do it. This way because that's the way they taught me. And I think the way you approach just your learning or how you would treat someone in general reflects how you define mentorship. It's the values your family taught you. And when you're treating a person, you're treating that whole person. You're not treating a diagnosis. You're not treating a surgery. You're not just treating an injury. So I think that's a great viewpoint for young clinicians, young anyone, even people outside the sports med field, to hear and reflect on, because it's not the norm of how quote unquote mentorship.
Right.
And I think that's a really, really big take home point. Jack, did you want to comment?
Yeah, I mean, I think that was a great kind of like, I don't know, piece of advice, but discussion, because I think a lot of people, when we ask that question, shout out, some people that they like to follow or they bounce ideas off of, or it's really based on ideology of how they like to practice. But coming at it and saying like, hey, the people I grew up with are the people who made me. And in that are the people that got you to, being honest and open and being confident and treating people, how they should be, and creating, the values in you that make you get to your why, that make you get to your doctorate program, that make you get through being an adjunct faculty and all the way to where you are now. And I think that's the greatest mentor of them all. And probably the only truest mentor that you have is your family. So that was an awesome statement. Thank you.
Yeah. And feedback. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, yeah. I was going to say, and you don't have to know them all right now. Like they come and go. So it takes different experiences in your life to realize that somebody has been there this whole time that might be able to speak into it a little bit more. Like my mom is super emotionally reactive, like unstable. She cries at everything. Like she can't handle anything medical. Like it's just, we're totally different people in that aspect, right? When I was basically going through my transition from full-time work, pro team to nothing, and I'm just waiting and hoping like my license, and then still thinking like, what am I going to do? Like I'm on my own, blah, blah, blah. Like my mom popped in as a potential mentor that she's been divorced since 6th grade. She's lived independently literally since 6th grade. So wait a second, pause. Like she might be somebody that could speak into, even though we don't talk or react the same way to kind of different situations. She's been an independent woman for decades, like over 20 years. And so like, just pause real quick and go like, hey mom, how'd you do it? Or like, what helped you? And even though look, we're different people in that kind of emotional kind of psychology, it was helpful and surprising. Like I would never go, my mom is going to be super helpful for my medical mentorship, right? Ever. And then it became this like personal mentorship of, well, I'm cut from her cloth too. And she has seemed to make it work because she seems totally fine. She's done it on her own. She's never needed help in a sense of like living independently and carrying on. She just put her head down and kept going. So you never know when somebody might become somebody you need to help you grow. You just have to be open-minded enough and kind of step back and self-reflect on what is it that you're struggling with, or what is it that you're flourishing with that somebody else can maybe relate to kind of help you, progress even further from that standpoint.
Most definitely. I hope our listeners take a little time to self-reflect on that, and then maybe they'll open their eyes a little bit to who some potential mentors, quote unquote, who have been there the whole time are. The point I wanted to touch on is you brought up respect and how important respect is in really any field or any situation of life, whether you agree with someone or whether you don't agree with someone for whatever the reason that might be. And I'm sure everyone faces maybe individuals they don't quote unquote vibe with necessarily throughout their career. But throughout yours and all these opportunities you've experienced, are there any obstacles or quote unquote challenges that you can touch on? And if you did face these, how you proceeded to overcome them?
Probably my earliest memory was while working at my faculty member's practice. I got a 60-something-year-old male with IT band friction syndrome as a diagnosis. And I walk in going like, I'm going to nail this because I've had this. So I literally know how to take care of this, right? So I'm all jazzed because I had only been working, I don't know, maybe a couple months since, I got my license. And I walk in and I'm talking to him and I can already tell that he's not quite engaged and listening. So at the point I'm ready to transition into the exam, he goes, you know what, honey, you're really young and pretty, but I'm going to need somebody with a little more experience. And I just it hit me like a ton of bricks. And I wasn't even offended on kind of more the sexist kind of comment. It was more like, which I end up saying, I go, but I know this condition. I've literally had this condition. And honestly, I'm probably the best one to speak on this at this facility. I'm probably your professional guide in this. And he's like, yeah, I want the owner. And I'm what is happening? I don't get rejected in evaluations. Does that even happen? What is happening right now? So I leave the room and I walk out and I'm walking down the hallway and the lead PT is coming towards me and he's like, what's with your face? And I'm like, I just got rejected, as a PT. He wants the owner. And he's like, oh, your first rejection. Guys, Joss just had her first rejection. Blah, blah, blah. So this is a thing. And they're like, yeah, of course. You're going to get it here and there because you might wear the wrong color one day or whatever. Yep. And I'm like, this is ridiculous. You're here for healthcare. Let me help you. And, as a novice, licensed PT, I'm like, I know everything. So let me help you. Let me share all this knowledge that I just worked my ass off for 3 years. And you're not going to let me help you? Yep. You're just so offended, right? So he ended up seeing the owner and whatever, and I had to get over it. But it was just, that was the first, are you serious? And then I could go back on wait, I'm too pretty as your PT? When does looks matter for your knee? Yeah. I mean, I might not be a hand model because I wash my hands all the time, but other than I don't know. I was just shocked, right? So that was the first, I taken aback, and I still am, honestly. I don't know. But more recently, working for the pro team, I was in conversations often between the technical staff, medical staff, my employers, going back and forth because it's a very dynamic process. And I was in a conversation and I full on got thrown an admitted sexist comment my way. That to the point where I go, that's sexist, right? To say that I can't do this because I'm a female, but you're going to say that our male strength coach can do something like that. And he was like, yeah, I know.
Wow.
But that's my opinion. And that's what I feel. And I was shocked, but I took it as a learning opportunity. Like I said, I don't react strongly. I've learned to not react strongly right at the time because I would have loved to given my verbal statement back at him. But I made note of it because that is something that if this becomes a problem, you have a maybe full on bigger situation that you need to speak into potentially later if this becomes, a bigger problem. So, I documented it, the conversation, I recorded date, time, and I kind of just kept doing that throughout because there was a couple of other times, not as egregious, that it did happen. But regardless of that, I did my job. I still did my job. I tried not to let that affect me. I didn't gossip about it to a million people and go, oh my gosh, did you hear what he said to me? Because at the end of the day, you need to take care of what you can control. Mm-hmm. And the last thing you need in any kind of multidisciplinary approach is he said, she said stuff, gossip, and things that potentially alter the trust level that everyone has with each other, right? So if we're there, bottom line, to get players healthy and get them and keep them on the field, then they don't need to know about these things that happened, right? They need to be taken care of the exact same way you would have. So you need to put your head down, do your job. Afterwards, you better vent it out or do whatever so it doesn't eat at you. But if this becomes a problem, you also need to speak to, your superiors and things like that are even above that, because then that becomes obviously a working issue for you to potentially deal with. So it was a bigger kind of deal than obviously my "you're too pretty for my knee" situation. But I think how you handle things helps speak to your character that other people see, because some of that did come out afterwards, and like a lot of players knew, a lot of the organization knew, and they were like, I never knew you were going through some of that struggle, which I was proud of, because I didn't want to look like I was struggling through something and it was altering my care. And at the same time, I did speak to certain individuals that needed to know in the organization, just as food for thought. If you're going to continue to employ me, him, them, whatever, like this is going to be a barrier if we don't nip it soon. So speaking to the right people and knowing how to handle yourself in that situation is a learning process. And hopefully you don't have to go through it, but it's something's going to happen. Like everyone's going to have something of some sort. But yeah, it's an interesting learning kind of growth, because it always comes without you completely knowing it's going to happen right there. So you can prepare all you want and how you might handle things, but until it happens, you have to do your best to just stay quiet and stoic and not react, and don't get overly emotional necessarily, and then just proceed on like the next day, the next time.
Yeah, I think this kind of component of what we're talking about right now is not something that we really talk about, like when we're, on the up and coming and we're learning about our craft and really getting into the rehab realm, is, just those like moments that come up that just kind of take you aback for a minute. And those moments are ones where you really grow into, a leader, I think. I think we've all had that situation of the rejection. I know I did I think it was in my first 2 months out as a new grad. Same thing. I was like, I'm ready to take this on. And I just remember her story of how she got injured, and obviously won't go into it, was so absurd that I think I came off as like, what? And so she did the same thing. She asked for the owner and it was fine. We were on good terms afterwards. But, those moments start to come up and insert themselves at different points in your career. And it's times when you can sit and be like, all right, like how is the best way that I'm going to handle this for my organization, for my community, for my athlete, for whoever it may be. And then just being able to take those moments and analyze, okay, like what do I need to do in this situation to make sure that, my care is good, but things are being heard and I'm being heard as, I should be.
Yeah. That being said too, I'm sorry you had to deal with that.
Yeah.
It's an unfortunate situation. And like you said, everyone at some point in their career, whether they're male, whether they're female, will have to deal with something like that along the lines. And again, you can prepare as much as you want, but you won't know how you'll react until you're in that situation. I know I appreciate, and I'm sure our listeners do too, one, you speaking to that, but then also talking about how you handled it. It's not always easy to keep things inside sometimes, but I truly believe the way you handled it was the most professional way to handle it and the best way to set you up for success in the long term. And that being said, it comes back to things we were discussing before, where we're dealing with people. And everyone has their own beliefs and, their own values. So sometimes agreeing to disagree, if that's the nicest way to put it, is the most professional way to deal with something. So I appreciate you touching on all of that.
So kind of going off of, being able to work with Fresno football team, and it was their inaugural year when you went on, outside of what we just chatted about, what were some of the really unique and fun things of being a part of a professional team that's just starting? Like you were a part of the first rehab team, the first strength and conditioning team. What was that like?
It was honestly amazing. It was awesome. I already knew the athletic trainer, the lead AT, at the time, because we had already just worked together through our mutual like high school kiddos that went down. The strength coach was new to me. I had only known him probably a couple months before he joined the team, but we were the three amigos. So I mean, everything we did, we talked to each other. We had a very open, honest dialogue, and we had to feed off of each other because the way that it worked and the hierarchy of what happened was the AT runs the show and makes like quote unquote the final decision on a player's status. So they're the ones that we kind of had a RAG system, a red, amber, green, where we would code each player. Red, they're absolutely out of practice or the game, they cannot attend. Yellow, they're coming off like an injury and they're kind of transitional. And then green, they're full go coming off of their whatever injury. So with that said, I think because I already knew our AT, but because I'm very honest, and if I make a statement or I make a diagnosis about something, he trusted it 100%. He literally never altered my decision. And ultimately, I was the one that was, pretty much seeing these players for their rehab because they would get some post practice kind of care, but then they'd have to come in and see me. And then I would report back so he can make a final decision. So we had a great relationship. Working with the strength coach as well really helped me open up, I think, into more of the strength and conditioning knowledge base, because I think as PTs, we get very much in tune with the basic level, like rehab kind of stuff. And unless you personally are going through some type of training program that you have a better knowledge base on, we don't go through full, absolute, ankle pump to CrossFit game style, kind of training in grad school. You get exposed to certain things, but it's not consistent across the board. So not every PT has that knowledge base, I feel like, to better transition higher level athletes appropriately. And I think PTs are kind of gun shy in trying certain activities maybe a little bit sooner. But the cool part was that I got to because this is their job. So as a PT, you would normally be like, dude, this is 4 to 6 weeks, easy, boom. Don't even ask me a question. Like it's not worth it. You get a player and it still is a 4 to 6 week time frame that you're considering, but do they really have to be out that much time? Because their career and their job and their livelihood is at stake. And it affects the entire organization because they don't want players that can't play, and a player doesn't want to be hurt because then they could lose their spot, lose their job entirely. Yep. So it was really cool to work with someone on a higher level end and somebody on the triage end that just saw it, just heard it, smelled it, felt it, everything, and work across that spectrum, because it exposes you to a timeliness of when you need to act or when you should not act. And your professional didactic information, let alone whatever experience you've already had with that type of injury or athletic population, kind of helps just seal, I do know what I'm doing or I don't. And I need to bring in like more conversation about this because I don't want to jeopardize a player's health, bottom line. So yes, it's their career, but bottom line, I need to get you better. That is my entire job role. I have to be objective about that. You can't be sentimental about like they're your favorite player as well. And you're like, oh my gosh, but they need to play and blah, 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 right? So it was awesome because we three were also in our first professional job roles. So, we're all learning as we go. Our entire technical staff was brand new to their role, other than our assistant coach. So our head coach was his first head coach. Our GM was the first GM role. So it was very interesting to kind of understand the dynamic. And I'm not going to lie, it was a total cluster F, like for a while, like just understanding like when and who and blah, 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 and all that stuff. So it's cool because, you're like, wow, this is awesome. But you're like, this cannot be the way. Like there has to be better organization. And other like sport, teams kind of stuff. But yeah, it was it was the highlight of my career at that point. And it wasn't because of the professional athlete standpoint. It was just, I had already been working for a decade. And so it brought this like refreshing standpoint on how my role can be different than what I already had been doing day to day in a private practice. And, you know, when you step back and you go, okay, now I have this opportunity to do this, you know, why would I change certain viewpoints, or how do I need to change it? Because like I said, it's a timeliness factor and this is their job. And so that was awesome, because I actually got to go back on usually my statement that I make to usually eager guys that want to get back to whatever sport too early. And they'll be like, hey, Joss, can I play basketball this weekend? And by the way, they're like 8 weeks out from an ACL reconstruction, or
of course,
something like stupid, honestly. And I'd be like, do you get paid for it? And they'd be like, what do you mean? Is it like a reward? I go, no. Do you get paid to go out and play basketball? Do you get paid to golf? Do you get paid to do that? That's always like, I'll come back to that. And I don't even have to say anything, because they're like, and they're just like, no. And I'm like, right. So no, I'm not going to give my right. So this time it was like, you do get paid for it. So
oh, man. Yeah.
Like, I have to consider, could you play on this without risking potential like worsening, right? But is it possible? And so you like, I had to step back a little bit like on that, because I love throwing out that statement, believe me, all the time.
And now you can't.
Yeah, right. Or I can, because I'm like, yeah, you're literally going to blow.
Fair.
So your choice. And regardless of what that says, we would make decisions, but head coach can still trumpet. They can still, you know, pull a player, you know, even if you have them, you know, coded a certain color or whatnot. So being able to, yes, be creative and work with your team and have so much fun back and forth, you know, at certain parts of the day too, you had to be able to like stand up and be like, this is my decision for this reason. Let the appropriate people know. And so if they choose to go against your decision or whatnot, you know, it's already clearly stating you did your job, you stuck to whatever. And then so be it from there.
I think that's great. You touched on so many different components in such a short amount of time, which is super beneficial for anyone in the sportsmed field right now who's maybe a little green, or someone who's thinking about getting into the sportsmed field. I mean, one, the coding system you guys had or have is great. You know, it streamlines communication, it streamlines where everyone is in the situation, but also helps everyone work together as a team. So like you said, if you diagnose something, your athletic trainer is on the same page and communicating the same thing to the athlete, which I know, talking to some other professionals, that can be an issue communication wise. The other thing is too, even when you're telling someone the why of maybe why they're coded that color, at the end of the day, you're all working as a team and you're all respecting each other's decisions. So I think that's great. And then on top of all of that, the whole gray area of return to sport and rehab, and when this is someone's job, using the individuals around you and collaborating to get them back to where they need to be as soon as possible. So I think that's great that you touched on all those points. So that being said, with this whole podcast, you mentioned a lot of great things. For our listeners out there, what are maybe, it doesn't have to be two, but anything you haven't already touched on, just some pieces of advice to a young clinician coming up in the field, whether they're in PT, whether they're in strength training, whether they're a sports dietitian, but that's something that maybe you wish you would have known coming up.
It's kind of hard to speak to, in a sense that I feel like you have to go back to yourself. Like, you have to be able to self-reflect first and understand your own strengths, but more importantly, your own weaknesses. If you come out showboating because you know a million types of things for XYZ body part and whatever kind of condition, or you're book smart, you're like the book smart, you know, king, queen, right? And yet you try to go into a role that's very hands-on and you can't perform. but you struggle through and you force your own agenda through. Vice versa, the manual person who's so good with their hands and everything like that getting in. And then when somebody asks, why should I do this? You push your own agenda and your own opinion. And it's not actually like concrete evidence, statement, right? I feel like that type of novice attitude, naivety, cockiness is what's going to get you in trouble. And both on a potential, like you could hurt somebody, you could harm somebody because you think you know it. And so you're just going to run with it and push it versus the people that go, yeah, I suck at mobilizations or whatever, right? So rather than trying to just, oh, well, let me throw this like HVLA on this CT junction, it a few times and, I follow, this person online and it looks super easy. Just step back and go, okay, I want to get better at this. So therefore go get your education, go get your mentorship by somebody, get your hands on it, get some con ed and work on your craft. Okay. But at the same time, you don't have to know everything. You literally do not have to be the perfect person and have the extreme knowledge base and hands-on skills for every single body part, every single manipulation, every single, like whatever. You don't have to do that. So just be honest with yourself and be open-minded. So even if you swear this is like the best, whatever, rehab exercise to start with, to end with, whatnot, and somebody else offers their opinion, just be open-minded because every now and then you might get somebody that doesn't respond to your perfect circuit of whatever. And you might have to come back and go, that one thing that my coworker was talking to me about that I thought was just so low level or so under, my, program or whatever, maybe that is something that I should consider because maybe that's how this person responds, right?
Yeah.
So I feel like it's always, you have to know yourself. You have to know why you want to get better or not at a certain technique. I mean, working with a team, some of the best days too were a player would come in and tell me something. And I had a lot of players that told me first. They trusted me the most, okay? And they would come in and they'd be like, God, my neck is killing me here and there. But then can you do that one thing for my shoulder and then my hip and blah, blah, blah. So I'd screen it and whatnot. And I'd be like, oh, like this is definitely like high cervical. I could work at it, but I'm kind of in a time crunch that I don't throw like OA manips. Okay. Mm-hmm. I just don't have the skill set. I did learn it. I was good for a little bit. And then I had nobody that I was working on. So I lost that feel. Right. So I knew that was what he needed. I knew he would benefit from it. So I throw the thoracic and the CT and I'm like, see Cairo over there? Boom, go. And handoff, boom. And so I was efficient with what I needed to do with him. And I knew I diagnosed it correctly of what he needed to work on because he came back and the Cairo's like, oh yeah, that sucker was locked up and blah, blah, blah. So know you and don't be afraid to go, this isn't my skill set, but Joe over there knows it. Boom, get him involved, ask questions and just learn and kind of re-screen why you're doing things.
Yeah, I think that's huge. And I think especially for a lot of new grads and young clinicians kind of coming out, there's this idea of I'm going to take on the world. I can do everything. I've learned everything. I'm going to be amazing. But I think it's okay, like you said, to be humble and understand, is there someone for my patient? Something's happening with my microphone. Is there something for this patient that is going to be better than what I could provide right now? I'm similar. I'm not great on cervical manipulations and I will not do it because I know other people who are going to be better. And fortunately, in my clinic, I have lots of other people who are great at it. And I just say, hey, go to see my colleague over there. They're going to do it for you. And I think, the other component of what you said is really always self-analyzing and self-reflecting. And I think for me, that's one of the first things I work on with my students or with my, younger people that come in and want mentorship is if you can't self-reflect, then how do you know what you need to work on in the first place? If you can't sit here and tell me, I think I did these things well, because I think there's value in understanding what you do well too. but also this is what I need to work on is important, not because you're not always going to have someone standing over your shoulder saying you need to work on X, Y, and Z, right? You're going to be in the situation of working potentially with a pro team and saying like, oh man, like, I shouldn't do this, but there's someone over there that can. So that's wonderful advice. And thank you again for everything that you've chatted about today and being open and discussing all your, trials and triumphs. But yeah, thank you so much for being on our podcast. We've appreciated it.
Yeah, we really appreciate it. And congrats on the new role.
Yes, congrats.
Yes, thank you.
Hopefully once this all clears up, well, I know you're still working, but at least it'll be a better position to be in.
Hopefully we'll be flourishing.
Yes,
exactly.
And you will. Thank you, Jocelyn.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you for listening to the Women Leaders in Sports Medicine podcast. This podcast is for you to take a step closer to your dreams. Visit www.womenleadersinsportsmedicine.com to join our roundtables, learn about our mentorship programs, and to let us know what you want to hear. Have a great day, and remember, it's your time to lead.